I want to talk to you tonight about, my voice is no good, about the sin of the spies, which is in Parsha Shlach, in the Art Scroll. It's page 798, or 799. And the reason why I want to do this now is because my Rabbi Zatzal said that the sin of the spies laid the groundwork for the ultimate conquest of the land of Israel, destruction of the temple, and the expulsion of the Jews from the land of Israel into exile. So first I want to explain to you how to understand, one way to understand the sin of the spies, and then I'll tell you how the Rabbi Zatzal linked it to going into exile. Now, the explanation I'm going to give you now is the explanation of the Malbim. Others disagree, notably the Ramban disagrees, but I'm going to show you the Malbim's pshat and explain how he sees it in the words. And then, as I said, I'll tell you how it's linked to the very idea of conquest and exile. So, he starts off by pointing out that in the Hebrew language, there are three different words for spy. One is latur, which is the word that's used in this parsha exclusively. One is liragel, from which the famous word meraglim comes, which we use typically, and the word that's used in the book of Devarim to describe this incident, but here it's only latur, and also lachpor. Those three different words have three different connotations. Thank you very much. And his understanding of latur is to evaluate. The spies that were chosen here, the spy out the land of Israel, were sent on a mission to evaluate the land. This was not a military mission. We're now looking for ways to attack, strategies, weak points, possible counterattacks. They're going to evaluate the land. Now watch how he sees that in the words of the parsha. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Send forth men, if you please. Let them spy out the land of Canaan that I give to the children of Israel. One man each from his father's tribe shall you send, every one a leader among them." One per tribe. And each one should be a leader of a tribe. Why is that? Why is that? Imagine you had a spy in your mission, and you said, "I'll tell you who I'm going to send. I'm going to send the majority leader of the House of Representatives in each state. 50 people, high political representatives." Wouldn't you ask, why are you sending them on a military mission? They're not trained military men. They're political leaders. And indeed, a generation later, when Joshua set up the conquest of the land of Israel, and he sent spies, was nothing like this. There wasn't one from each tribe, there were only two, and they weren't leaders of the tribes. So the very choice of the people is very questionable. Then you have their names. And something we may talk about if we have chance, that Moses prayed for Yeshua specifically. Okay, verse 17. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan. He said to them, "Ascend here in the south, climb the mountain, see the land, how is it?" Okay, that's very general. How is it? What in particular? "And the people that dwells in it, is it strong or weak?" Well, let's see. Strong or weak could be a military evaluation. It also could be an evaluation of the productivity of the land. What kind of people live on it? If it's a land whereby there's barely enough food to go around, people will not grow to be strong. They'll be weak, helpless. So when you say whether the people are strong or not, it doesn't have to be a military evaluation. It could also be the quality of living conditions on the land. Few or numerous, same thing. Human population was limited from many times and places by the food supply. It just isn't enough food to supply doubling of the population every 20 years. There's enough food to go around. And they're numerous, that means that the land is plentiful in what it produces. So again, it could be either military or quality. And how is the land in which it dwells? Is it good or bad? The land in which it dwells, good or bad? That doesn't sound like a military evaluation. Doesn't sound to be relevant to where you should attack, where you should defend. How are the cities in which it dwells? Are they open or are they fortified? Now, that sounds very much like a military evaluation, but some of the commentators say, how confident are the people? Are they afraid of attack? Or are they confident that no one will attack them because they're so strong? If the cities are fortified, it means they're afraid. They put up walls so that an attacker can't have access. I'll give you an example of what's meant here. There's a mitzvah 3 times a year for all of the men anyway to come to the temple on the pilgrimage festivals. But the question arises, if all the men are coming, why doesn't that land leave the land open to attack? Why isn't that risky? So the usual analogy that's given is, you know that the border between the United States and Canada is basically an open border. No walls, no military fortifications. Why isn't America afraid that Canada is going to attack? Because they'll be obliterated overnight. They know that very well. They're not afraid of Canada attacking because they trust in their strength. In ancient Israel, when God's providence was manifest, you could leave the borders open and not worry about being attacked because they knew that if they attacked, in 6 months they'd all be gone. So, if you're talking about people who build walls, it means they're afraid of attack. And they're protecting themselves against attack. So this means that it tells you what kind of people grow here. How do they develop here? They develop strong, self-confident, capable, or they grow up timid and fearful. Again, it doesn't have to be a military assignment. It could be either way. And how is the land? Fertile or is it lean? That certainly doesn't sound like a military assignment. Are there trees in it or not? That could be, trees are a source of sustenance. They are a source of building materials. Doesn't sound directly like a military question. Then, finally, you shall strengthen yourselves to take from the fruit of the land. Bring back fruit. That's not military, boys and girls. That's not military. They was sample of the fruit that the land grows. So you have here a mixture of descriptions, some of which could be military or evaluative, and some are definitely evaluative. So it's fair to say that the project is a project of evaluation. The ones that could go either way should be understood as consistent with the ones that are specifically evaluative and not military. And that goes together with who is chosen to do it. And according to the Malbim, that goes together with the verb that's being used, which is latur. Okay. They went and spied out the land. They came back after 40 days. Verse 26 came to Moses and Aaron, the entire assembly, the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran, brought back the report, and they showed them the fruit of the land. They reported to him and said, "We've arrived at the land to which you have sent us. And indeed, it flows with milk and honey, just as you promised." Not military. It's very fruitful. Has wonderful fruits. And this is its fruit. Now skip this next word, but skip it for a moment. The people that dwells in the land is powerful. Weren't they told to tell whether the people are strong or not?
Yes.
They were told to do that. And that could be part of their evaluation. Cities are fortified. They were supposed to do that too. Very great. Offspring of the giants. Molech dwells in the south. Hittite, it was Sidon. Amorite dwells in the mountains. Canaanite dwells by the sea and the bank of the Jordan. All of that would be consistent with a report on the quality of the land. And that's what some of the commentators say. Everything we read is consistent with giving and evaluation. Now, there's the first word in verse 28. Your helpful, friendly translator translated it as but. But in Hebrew, it is not aval, or aval, which means but. The word is ephes. Ephes means zero. Zero. Zero is a comment. It's a wonderful land. It's a fruitful land. Beautiful land. But it's worthless. Ephes. Zero. Why? Because there are very powerful people in it, because the cities are fortified, so forth and so on. Oh, that one word changes the whole character. They're now commenting on the practicality of conquering it. That is not what they were sent to do. They were sent only to give an evaluation. Here they stepped out of their role. They had no right to do this. And that's where the failure is rooted. Now, to show you how clear this was, verse 30, Gottleib silenced the people toward Moses and said, "We shall surely ascend and conquer it, for we can surely do it." Gottleib is responding. He's saying, no, we can actually conquer it. Who's he saying no to? So the report that was just given. When they said Ephes, they're saying we can't conquer it. And he's saying, you're wrong. Don't say that. It's not true. We can conquer it. So it's clear that that's what they intended. That's what they said. And the 10 of them, 10 out of the 12, took that position and made this terribly wrong commentary. And the two, Gottleib and also Yoshua, in this story, Gottleib is the big hero. Yoshua plays a much lesser role. He's standing up for what they were promised and telling them not to give that evaluation. And the people don't back down. 31. The people ascended with him. 31. Aleph. Yeah, there's no but in the Hebrew, but it's implied. The man who ascended with him said, "We cannot ascend to the people, for it is too strong for us." There it is, word for word. And by the way, in the Hebrew, it's beautifully ambiguous, which the English can't capture. Because in the Hebrew, you could read it, the people there is too strong for us or for him. Capital H, him. Mimenu can be us or him. Meaning it's too strong for God. That's how far they went. Wow, I was right. Okay, and then they fomented the rebellion, and people said, we're going to go back to Egypt, we can't conquer, we're going to die there. And that's what caused them to spend another 40 years before they conquered the land of Israel. Another 40 years where? In the wilderness, outside the land of Israel. Egypt was in exile. Talk about Golos Mitzrayim, the exile of Egypt. What was it when we were in the wilderness? Well, we weren't under anybody else's control, but we weren't in the land of Israel, were we? We were prevented from going in. Another 40 years outside. The men, anyway. The women did go in, but the men not. Women went in after the 40 years.
It's kind of like a limbo type.
You put that's a very interesting point. He says it's like a limbo. There are sources which indicate that that's a very good description. You're living in a cocoon. You have the clouds of glory. You have the manna that you're eating. You have a miraculous well that follows you and gives you water. You have the clouds of glory give you constantly good weather. They filter out the UVS waves. They flatten the terrain, right? You're living in a cocoon when the king of Moab hires Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet, to curse the Jewish people. All he says is, I want to make sure they don't go into the land of Israel. Just chase them. I'll chase them out of the land. It wasn't going to take Moab. It was forbidden for us to take Ammon and Moab. They're our relatives in a certain distant way. Just stay out. So the Shem Shmuel says, what bothered him? What was his interest in our not going into the land of Israel? He says because they're living in the wilderness in a miraculous environment. They have no effect on the rest of the world. They're living in a limbo that's not connected. They go into the land of Israel and start living a natural life, which was the plan. Farmers and craftsmen and all the rest. They're going to take the physical and elevate it and spiritualize it. If they do that, for the rest of the world, the physical will no longer be satisfying. It will no longer be self-sustaining. They're going to rob it of its ultimate significance. Leave me alone. That was his cry. Leave us alone. Stay in the wilderness. Stay there forever. Live with your miracles and with your God. We have no problem with you. Just don't go in and change our physical lives. So that's the same idea. Just be in your isolated, detached environment and don't have any effect on the world around us. Anyway, so that was the result. Now, that's as far as the Malbim goes. As far as how shall I say, an aid to what the Malbim is saying, I'm sure he had this in mind. Just didn't write it out. The end of Pasha Shlach, you have a very famous paragraph. Page 817. This is the parsha of Tzitzis, which we have as the third paragraph of the Shema that we say twice a day, and which at the end it tells us to remember that God took us out of Egypt to be our God. And in it says the following: Speak to the children of Israel, say to them, they shall make themselves tzitzis on the corners of their garments, throughout their generations, shall place upon the tzitzis corner the thread of turquoise wool, tchelis, shall cause the tzitzis for you, that you may see it and remember all the commandments of Hashem and perform them, and not explore after your heart and after your eyes. So translates the article. The Hebrew is Lo sasuru acharei levavchem v'acharei einichem. And lo sasuru, they're spelled with two last letters of the aleph base. Tough. Not a samach, a tough. That's latur, the same verb that we have in the story of the spies. What is the Torah telling us here? Don't evaluate after your eyes. Don't use your visual perception as a source of your evaluation, nor of your hearts. Don't use that as the basis. You're left to your own intuitive judgments are going to get it wrong. You're going to get it wrong. Desperately wrong. If you look at the Guide of the Perplexed, part 3, chapter 23, you'll see how Maimonides describes this, though not using this verse. Here's a commentary in the book of Job. Your whole sense of what's valuable, what's not valuable is mistaken. So this confirms, I think, the judgment of the Malbim that the story is a story of evaluation. Now, my Rebbe Zatzal said this. They sent out spies to evaluate the land, one from each tribe. What were they checking? The different tribes had different character, different subcultures, different economic strengths and weaknesses. One tribe would want to live by the seashore and do international commerce. Another would like to be in the plains and do agriculture. Another would like to be in the mountains. Another would like to live near deserts because they have certain types of there's copper mining and other things to do in deserts, like in the Arava. Each tribe has its own proclivities, its own preferences, its own talents and abilities. Each tribe sent one representative to be able to say, I know my tribe, I know what you want, I know what you need. I went there and I saw it. I saw there is a piece of land there that's good for us, for our tribe. Wouldn't this have been something to trust, maybe? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu took them out of Egypt with great miracles. He's bringing them to the land which he designated from the very beginning. He said, I'm taking you out up to the land of Canaan, land that's flowing with milk and honey. Do they have to see for themselves that it's really going to be good for them? Now, here's the heart of it, says the Rebbe Zatzal. When this happens, when they sent the spies, where was the Shechina? Where was God's presence? It was with them in the Midbar, in the wilderness. They sent the spies to detach themselves from the place where the Shechina was to go and explore the land. By the way, some say, the Mabit says, that God's presence dwelled in the land of Israel only when we went in. It's not geographical. When we went in and conquered it, that's when his presence was there. When it says that God's eyes are on it continuously over the whole land, only when we went in, not before. So they were abandoning God's presence in order to send out the mission of the spies. That, he says, is a zilzul in the Shechina. They did not show appropriate appreciation for being together with the Shechina. They should have refused to be separated from the Shechina. And that zilzul, making light of, treating with contempt, led to the possibility of their losing connection with the Shechina in the land of Israel also. If you're willing to voluntarily separate yourself from the Shechina, then there can come a time, because of your failures, they should be separated from the Shechina. You built that weakness into the relationship with the Shechina. And later it bore the fruit that it bore, and it ended up with conquest and exile. So, the crime of the spies laid the groundwork for this. There is a verse which expresses it somewhere in Psalms, and I lost it. I meant to look it up before, and I thought I knew where it was. I didn't see. I don't know. He quoted that verse when he said it. Perhaps you'll probably know the verse better than I. So now what happens is this. The land of Israel is supposed to be the place where the Shechina dwells with them. Now they're supposed to go there and find the fulfillment of the presence of the Shechina there. But the presence of the Shechina in the wilderness is only preparatory. It's only preparatory. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, was a portable housing. That wasn't the purpose. Purpose that should be permanent. You haven't come to Jerusalem yet, where you have the rest, which means stasis, something that's fixed and permanent, and the inheritance that I mean to give you. And now, because they rebelled, they have to wait another 40 years to go in. So it's again, that created a barrier between them and the land of Israel. So in the one case, it's a zilzul in the Shechina. In the other case, the result is being prevented from going in, staying outside more time. That led to the weakness that later they could be sent outside. This is a deep view of how Jewish history is connected. This is a watershed. This crime is a terrible watershed in Jewish history. Now, we are living in the time of the 3 weeks. And in fact, we're now in the 9 days, and we're coming. What we have in our minds is the temple that was, and what we have lost, terribly, the terrible destruction, and for us now an exile of 2,000 years. And although it is true that a great deal has been rebuilt, to regard what we have now as if it were the antidote to exile is a terrible mistake. Every year, at this time of year, articles from learned savants, great scholars, who say that mourning for the destroyed temple is ridiculous because go to Jerusalem and see how beautifully it's built up and how populous it is, and you see that this has no relevance to today's world. I want you to take a look. Okay, thank you very much for bringing out the Siddurim. On page, what is this? 109. 109. Wherever you are, you have these publications, and you can get a chance to write in a letter to the publisher. Here's a suggestion. This is a blessing that we recite 3 times a day for the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem. Pay attention! And to Jerusalem, your city, may you return in compassion. Capital Y, you. And may you rest within it, as you have spoken. You should return, that's number 1. You should rest, take a permanent residence within it, that's number 2. May you rebuild it soon in our days as an eternal structure, that's number 3. And may you speedily establish the throne of David within it, that's number 4. Have you got it? What are 1 and 2? That God's presence should return to the city. That's before building it. Before the roads and the buildings and the television antennas and the helipad and all the rest. Twice, Kadosh Baruch Hu's presence should return. Should we celebrate concert halls and art museums and highways and light rail and tunnels? That's what we should celebrate? Rebuilding without the presence of God in it? That's nuts. That's nuts. Let me give you a bitter comparison. You know that it is official Islamic doctrine that the only state that is legitimate is an Islamic state run by Islamic law. All other states are illegitimate. And they therefore have a project of conquering the world and establishing Islamic law everywhere. So the state of America, the United States of America, is illegitimate. They have the right to be the way it is. Now let's say they get their way, God forbid, and they conquer America. Conquer it. That's a lot of destruction. They're going to rebuild. Now that they're in control of America, they're going to rebuild. Let's take, for example, Washington, D.C. Some of the buildings are damaged, and there's destruction and so forth and so on. But of course, there are millions of pictures of those buildings, and there's building diagrams and all the rest, and they say, we're going to rebuild it just as it was. Only this time, the Senate building is going to be a gigantic Islamic library, and the Capitol, the White House is going to be a gigantic mosque, and but they're all going to look exactly the same. Now imagine after they finish this rebuilding project, that an American from Iowa comes to visit in the Capitol. Do you think he'll say, "Wow, how wonderful! Look how beautifully it's built. Look at all the buildings. I remember all the movies. I remember I was here as a child. It looks just like it did then. Wow, how wonderful. I don't think so. Because it's populated and dedicated to something which is anathema from an American point of view. Here, look at what's in it. Not how the stones are arranged. And although what we have, we are very thankful for, yeshivas and all the rest, the first two clauses of this blessing have not come true. So we should not mourn for the destruction of the temple because we have buildings. Indeed, we commemorate the destruction of the temple on the 9th of Av. One of the Tanoim said, had he been there when they set up this commemoration, he would have ordained it for the 10th. Not for the 9th. And the reason he says, because the Pesukim tell us that the Babylonians set the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, alight. They started to burn it late in the afternoon of the 9th, and it burned all night through until the day of the 10th. So almost all the burning of the temple took place on the 10th, not on the 9th. So he said, had I been there, I would have voted to have the date of the commemoration on the 10th, not on the 9th. Okay, but he was outvoted. We don't do it that way. Why not? What's the opposing view that led to the commemoration on the 9th? I heard from Rabbi Soloveitchik all those years ago, that they could not have burned down the house in which the Shechina dwells. Which means if they set it alight on the 9th, it's on the 9th that the Shechina left. We're not commemorating the destruction of a building. We're commemorating the loss of the Shechina. That's where it really counts. And that's why this blessing says, we want your Shechina to return to the city. That's going to repair what the destruction was. As the Pasuk says, God poured out his wrath on wood and stones rather than destroying us. He destroyed a building. But he destroyed the building because his Shechina left beforehand. And that was the real tragedy for us. The real tragedy for us was the loss of the Shechina. And that's what we're praying to have recovered. Until that happens, the idea of stopping to mourn for the city of Jerusalem is nonsense. It's nonsense. It's looking skin deep without any perception of the essence of the situation. So again, it's the same theme. What is your relationship to Shechina? What is your relationship to God's presence? That's where everything is centered. That's the heart of everything. Now, one of the things that we need to do, if we're going to take this to heart, is to recognize where we have access to Shechina even today, and to take it seriously, to make it real psychologically, which means to focus on it and to behave in the appropriate way. There's a famous story about Zalman Auerbach. An American came to visit him in his area, Shari Chesed. I guess he met him in Shul, and they were talking. Then Shlomo Zalman had to walk home, so the American was accompanying him. When they came to the place on the street before the door to his house, Shlomo Zalman sort of fixed himself up. He sort of straightened his coat. So the American assumed that he must have guests inside, and he felt that he should depart from him now. And so he said, I see the Rav has guests in his home, and so I'll take my leave. And the Rosh Hashanah said, no, I don't. No, I don't have any guests in the house. You're welcome to join me. So the American, being an American, no sense of restraint or propriety, said, but I saw the Rav, straightening up, so why did you do that? And he said, I'm walking into the place where the Shechina is. Because my wife and I live there in love, in harmony. And what it says where husband and wife live together in love and harmony, the Shechina dwells there. And the Shechina was real to him, in his house. was real, and he prepared himself for it. That's a sensitivity for Shechina that you could have now. Number one, to build it in your marriage and in your family. That should be a place where the Shechina dwells. And number two, to act it out, to express it in the action that you have. This sensitivity is something which, if you internalize the principle, you can find it throughout life. I'll give you another example. The Mishnah Pirkei Avos says, "Ezu chacham alomei mikol adam." Who is a chacham? I wouldn't translate it as wise. I don't think it's the right concept. Ezu chacham, someone who learns from everyone. Someone who learns from everyone. That could be difficult. Let's imagine a person who's 65 years old, traveled the world, has been an entrepreneur, and is well versed in the arts, and knows a lot about sports and so forth and so on. And now we tell them, we want you to learn something important from this 16-year-old. Really? I wonder what he has to teach me other than how foolish he is. 16-year-olds are very good at that. What do you think he would have to learn from a 16-year-old? Now, maybe the 16-year-old, learned weaving or something, which is kind of but very likely not. But from our point of view, every soul is unique. There are no duplicates. The soul is given certain inherent qualities and put into a certain environment in the world, certain family, time, geography, economics, language, external culture, and has a certain task to perform, and no two tasks are identical. And the soul is called in our literature, chelik Elokam Imal, literally a piece of God on high, which, as I will repeat, does not mean that God is a salami that you can slice into pieces. What it means is that of all the things that are created in the world, this expresses godliness, divinity, more than any other. So now, what do you want to learn? If you're a chacham, and you want to learn, you want to understand more, you want to enrich your understanding of the world, you're looking for what God has to teach. Where does he teach? Well, he teaches everywhere. That's true. He teaches everywhere. But some places are more concentrated and powerful and accessible than others. Actually, the words of Torah are a place where what he wants to teach is very accessible and available. So is the neshama of a person. If you can read the person's neshama, read his soul, you can get a revelation from the Creator of a piece of truth that he put into that person's soul. So the chacham is a person who says, I don't care how young you are, I don't care how inexperienced you are, or unsophisticated you are, you have a unique soul from which I can learn. That's an element of Shechina. That's an element of Shechina. I'll give you another example. The Mishnah Pirkei Avos says, when one person is learning Torah, the Shechina is with him. When two are learning Torah, the Shechina is with them. When three are learning Torah, the Shechina is with them. 5, 10. All of them have a certain presence of the Shechina available. So the Mishnah goes through what differences are, the different numbers. But the one for 10 is really astonishing. It says, for all the other ones, when people get together and learn Torah together, or do mitzvahs together, whatever it is, then as a result of what they do, the Shechina joins them. But with a minyan, the Shechina comes first and waits for them. Because Baruch Hu knows the minyan is going to gather, and he provides the Shechina there to be there to welcome them. To welcome them. So now when you walk into you're going to shul, and you're going to be a part of the minyan, hopefully it'll be from the first 10. You have to know when you walk in, the Shechina is waiting for you. The Shechina. That's why the way in which you daven in a shul is different from when you daven in other places. Your whole decorum in a shul is different from the way you daven in other places. For example, let's say it's Shachris, and you're putting on tefillin. What about that armor which you put on the tefillin? I'm not telling you a halacha now, but I'm telling you what the sensitivity that my Rabbi gave to us, and that is, don't leave it bare. Cover it. Cover the arm that you have the tefillin on. Don't be there bare-armed. It's not respectful to the place where the Shechina is. If you daven at home for some reason or somewhere else, then you don't have to do it, but there you have to do it. So you put your arm into your jacket of your, the sleeve of your jacket, you pull at least the jacket over your shoulder. Because I lived in Baltimore and I was connected with a tzaddik in Baltimore, he had a very interesting thing. He had a separate sleeve, which I have now also. And a completely detached sleeve with elastic at the end, and I put it on over my arm to cover my arm. The arm shouldn't be bare because the Shechina is there. This is the sensitivity which they lacked in the Midbar by sending out the Meraglim, and what we lost. Now, when we say that the Shechina, Imo Anochi B'Tzara, Anochi Ered Yitcha V'Gam Alo, I'll go down with you, and it says the Kodesh Baruch Hu to Yaakov Avinu to Egypt, and I'll come back with you. With you, that means Kodesh Baruch Hu is with us in exile. That's true. It says that in many places, that He's with us in exile. But it also says the Olam Lo Zaz Shechina because the Maravi, that the Shechina never left the Western Wall. So there are different aspects of Shechina, and whereas the first statement means when you're in exile, you're not abandoned, you're not cut off, you're not disconnected. That's true, but the connection is not the same connection. So here the sensitivity is even more subtle. Yes, there is an aspect of Shechina with you, but you don't have the whole thing. Part of it is still waiting back in the land of Israel. You know, when Jacob had the dream, and he saw the angels going up and down. So Rashi brings from Chazal that the angels going up are the angels of the land of Israel that are leaving him, and the angels coming down are the angels of Chutz La'aretz, outside the land of Israel, to accompany him, because that night he was crossing over the border the next day to leave the land of Israel. So the message there is, wherever you go, there'll be angels. And the angels are the connection between you and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. But not the same angels. Not the same angels. And when, according to Ramban, when he said, makes his vow, when he says, when I come back, I will do what I promised to do, one of the things he promises to do is that God will be a God for me. I say, what do you mean? In the meantime, he won't be? And according to Rambam, what he says is, you can be a God for me. I can have a relationship with you in the land of Israel, different from, superior to, richer than the relationship I can have outside the land of Israel. And if you bring me back, I promise to reconstruct that richer relationship. Not automatic. As you all know, the people who live in the land of Israel have no relationship with God at all. So, so you're not abandoned wherever you go, but the relationship is different. To be sensitive to that difference in Shechina is very, very important. My Rebbe Zatzal used to try to sensitize people. He said, I would ask a Jew who lives in Flatbush, okay, I don't know where the people are watching this, but if the shoe fits, I hope it doesn't fit. Let's put it that way. I hope it doesn't fit. Living in Flatbush, you ask a Jew, how's your Jewish life? If he says, my Jewish life here at Flatbush, wonderful. It's wonderful. I have my yeshiva, I have schools for my children, I have a shul that I daven in with a great chazan, very inspiring. I have the shurim that I go to. I have my mikveh, I have my bakery, I have 72 minutes after Shabbos. You know, my work is scheduled, so I never have to compromise in any Shabbos or Yom Tov. Shabbos is, Yiddishkeit is wonderful in Flatbush. If that's the sum total of his report, with no cracks, but I'm not in Israel, but he's lost that sensitivity because he's missing something. There may be perfectly good reason for him to be outside the land of Israel. I'm not saying everybody has to move here. That's a sugya in Shulchan Aruch, and there are various reasons why it's legitimate not to be here. But when it's legitimate not to be here, you're not here with a krechts, you say. Okay, because Baruch Hu wants me to be elsewhere. You know what it's like, there's a whole taz on this, but this person's learning Torah, and there's a mitzvah, there's a rule that if a mitzvah comes to you that no one else can do, so you have to stop learning to do it. So, the taz really asked this question. Well, let's see, you're sitting and learning, and not far from you there's a lake, and suddenly you hear a yell, someone's drowning in the lake. So, and there's nobody else around. And you happen to be capable. So of course you stop learning and you save his life. How do you feel about that? You're doing the right thing. You're doing exactly what the halacha says you should do. How do you feel about it? Decides you should feel devastated. Why did the Kodesh Baruch Hu enable me to keep learning? Why did he arrange it that I had to stop learning in order to save this person's life? Because learning is the higher performance. Yes, you give it up, but that doesn't mean, it means you're giving something up. You really are giving something up. And had you been on a different level, you wouldn't have had to give it up. So that means to appreciate the presence of Shechina that person has when he's learning Torah. All these things have to be, as we say in Yiddish, touched up. They have to be interpreted with the backdrop of where is the Shechina and how am I relating to the Shechina. This is one way of articulating Shivisi Hashem L'Negdi Summit. I've placed God before me continuously. That doesn't mean I cause him to be there. It means I am sensitive. I'm conscious of his presence. He's there, whether I am sensitive to it or not. But a person can lose that sensitivity. At least a person should be aware when he's lost the sensitivity. I'll end with one thing which I have said a number of times, but it fits in here, I think, very well. Ramchal, in the Derech Hashem, when he defines service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the definition is turn towards him and seek out closeness to him and attachment to him. When I first read that, I thought to myself, what? The first step in serving God is to turn towards him? Well, those words presuppose I'm pointing in the wrong direction. Turn around! Really? Isn't that a little bold to think that whenever I think of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm always pointing in the wrong direction? But we are so immersed in this physical world, and the physical world is so distracting from Ruchnius, that it is very practical. But then at least when you're going to go to do a mitzvah, and you carry out the Ramchal's instruction, turn around, at least you say, okay, so I was pointing in the wrong direction, but not now. Now I'm turning to point in the right direction. That already gives you a sensitivity to what you lost before, and what you're gaining now. That's very important. Shechina has to become a part of our constant vocabulary, something we shouldn't be afraid to talk about. And you can say to a child who does something exquisite, say to a child, I can see the Shechina shining from your face. If you say that and you mean it, the child will never be the same. I just heard today about a child who had a terrible, terrible trial. I think he's 12 years old. He was asked to do something extremely difficult. He was treated badly, and was treated badly in public, and he had to submit himself to absolute control from the person who beat him badly, unjustly, and he did it. He succeeded in doing it. And the result was that the person who treated him badly finally admitted it. He admitted it, and he asked for mechila, he asked for forgiveness, which caused a revolution in this adult's life. But they asked that from a 12-year-old child, and he was able to do it. You say to him, you see the Shechina shining from your face. You did that. You were able to do that. It's bringing the Shechina into the presence. We have to use what happened with the Meraglim and the fact that we went into exile, and we are still in exile. People, don't make a mistake. As long as the majority of Jews are not in the land of Israel, we are still in exile. We as the nation, not you and your family, or me and my yeshiva. It's the nation. And if you say, but we're almost there, and we're building it, and so on and so on, you don't know who's Jewish. You're not keeping track. Many of the people who are here aren't Jewish. Many who are brought in by the Israeli government aren't Jewish, hundreds of thousands of them. And many are living outside the land of Israel who are Jewish and don't even know it. So, as long as the people of Israel is not here, the majority anyway, then that's a tremendous measure of Shechina is lost. And we have to be conscious of the fact that there is that loss and work to daven for the day when the real kibbutz goal will take place and the Shechina will return.